That'll be a safety car, and that'll be a gift for Kimi Antonelli, who stayed out. And George will lose out from pitting just before.
Unbelievable!
The youngest ever leader of the Formula One World Championship, Kimi Antonelli wins the Japanese Grand Prix.
George is going to know he's got to beat Kimi to have a chance of securing a seat. So the pressure's going to start to mount on George.
It seems that Oscar's got the edge over Lando Norris at the minute.
Oscar has done a really good job of putting last year behind him.
Pierre Gasly is driving out of his skin this year.
It's very impressive. He's the only one that's really ahead of his teammate at the moment.
Do you think Red Bull are paying the price for developing so late into last season?
The light at the end of the tunnel seems further away than it has been now for quite some time.
Mattia confirmed, didn't he, that they are going to replace Jonathan. Any ideas who it might be? Welcome everyone to Suzuka for F1 Nation's review of the Japanese Grand Prix with me, Tom Clarkson, and joining me in the paddock is F1 correspondent Lawrence Barretto and Aston Martin third driver Jack Crawford. A very warm welcome to you guys. Now let's start with, from each of you, what's been the biggest talking point out of that race? Lawrence, let's start with you.
I don't know if this is too niche, but I was going to say that McLaren seemed to have understood the package that they were struggling with in the first couple of races, to the point where they could have won the race today if things had worked out differently. Of course, we don't know what would have happened if the safety car hadn't come out and whether or not Kimi Antonelli would have been able to get past Oscar on track. But we got to see it, and I think that would have been pretty cool. And I think, we've seen the first couple of races, the Mercs have dominated. So I think to have another team in there to really put the cat amongst the pigeons was a really exciting prospect.
And I was really impressed by Oscar Piastri today. He actually said it was one of his best weekends in Formula One in the press conference. Were you impressed by him, Jack?
Yeah, I was. I was kind of watching the race, trying to watch obviously Aston Martin a bit, but I was like, Oscar's keeping his own, and I honestly thought he was going to win the race if it wasn't for the safety car, which was...
You think he had it? You think he had enough pace?
I think he understood the strategy. Once him and George had that one fight in the chicane and he got him back, I think he understood the strategy and he wasn't going to really, get past. So I feel like Oscar was in a great position and definitely could have won.
We'll come back to Oscar. Let's start by talking about the man who's won the Grand Prix. 2 wins in 2 races, the youngest ever leader of the Formula One World Championship. Kimi said after the race that he has taken a big step since last year. Lawrence, have you been impressed by him this year? Can you see the step he's talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think last year we just saw these peaks from Kimi, really exciting peaks, the kind of peaks that would have convinced Toto to give him the chance in the first place. But I think what we've seen in 3 races already, he's got a 100% record of making the most of his opportunity. He's cut the mistakes out. I think when he's then had a small mistake like in China, he's rode it back in and not let it kind of get away. And I think today, when he dropped back to P6, he saw George get ahead of him. He probably might have felt, it's going to be difficult now to get that race win back. But actually he didn't. Well, it didn't feel like that from the outside. It just felt like he just cracked straight back on and focused on doing the job that he could. And yes, okay, the safety car played into his favour and a number of things happened. But actually you've got to ride your luck in Formula One. And I think he made the most of the car that he had today and the performance advantage actually that he's had over George for the whole week. He was fastest through practice. He was the better driver through quali. I know George had the problem in quali, but I think he's really stamped his authority and built on that momentum. Because I don't know, Jack, I don't know if you feel like in sport, once you have one good result, if you can build on that, it really helps your confidence, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It reminds me a lot of, Oscar last year. It feels like a very similar situation where, it's very early in his career and, he started winning races and he's just, kind of gotten to a groove of things. And it's, especially when you're feeling good with the car, when you're able to go to every race and be straight away on the pace, it makes it so much more effortless and easier, and there's less pressure as well. So it's definitely a great place to be in.
I'm also fascinated about how the intra-team dynamic at Mercedes is changing because, George stepped up last year to replace Lewis Hamilton and was the team leader and did a great job. But suddenly Kimi is a real threat to him now, and I just wonder whether George is quite as generous in the debriefs about what the car's doing, or giving advice to Kimi now, because he's a real threat, isn't he?
Well, I'm interested to see how that will evolve, I think, over the course of the season. But frankly, if it is a two-horse battle between the two of them in the championship, that's going to stop, anyway, threat or no threat. I think what is more significant is both of them know they might be driving for their futures at Mercedes, because, Toto Wolff chased Max Verstappen last year. If they lose one seat, it's going to be one of them, and at this rate George is going to know he's got to beat Kimi to have a chance of securing his seat. So the pressure's going to start to mount on George, and I think it's interesting how quickly it's changed, because in Australia George looked every bit the champion. He did everything right, he used all of his experience, and then Kimi's come back and done 2 in a row, and I couldn't believe that stat, that he's got 2 wins in a row before George has, considering how long George has been in the sport, different type of car and not the performance car. But I think Kimi's doing everything that he needs to do to put the pressure on George. It's a shame we've got this break now, because we won't actually get to see the next stage for another 5 weeks.
But look, there's no getting away from it that Kimi is still struggling with the starts. I think of the sprint race in China, and of course today you reference him dropping back to P6 at the start. You drove in FP1, Jack. Did you get to do any practice starts? How difficult are these cars to get off the line?
No, I didn't get to do any practice starts. Unfortunately, we had an issue, which meant I didn't get to do one at the end of the session.
Have you done any on the sim? Surely.
I've done a start. So yeah. I know how it works, and it's tricky because first of all you have this whole boost pressure turbo thing where you have to kind of just sit on throttle for 5 to 10 seconds depending on the team, and there's that part. I feel like there's so many different parts. There's the battery being charged. Is it charged on your formation lap? And then I think the most difficult part is, and what I've seen actually Kimi struggle with a lot, and why he's had so much wheel spin on his starts is, straight away, by regulation you have to have, electrical energy deploying when the car, first goes. So immediately that just puts a big kick of power that you probably don't want when you're going from zero. And so, some people leaving with massive wheel spin, some people can't get off the line. It's quite exciting actually, because you never know who's gonna lead in the turn one.
But isn't it interesting that Oscar Piastri, in his first Grand Prix start of the year, nailed it to the extent that he did? He actually said in the press conference, I thought it was a good start. I didn't think it was a brilliant start. It just sort of shows that him and McLaren seem to have made great strides, whereas isn't it slightly ironic that the works team is the one that's having more issues getting off the line?
Yeah, I think Oscar actually had a couple of really strong starts in practice. I remember seeing how quick he got off the line yesterday after FP3. So I think they have made big steps forward there. But actually, we've got to remember these are the reigning world champions, right? And they've got this really good relationship with Mercedes. They already know how their technical structure is working, how to get the best out of a car, how to develop a car. It's only taken them 3 races to make this kind of step. So maybe we were too tough on them in the early phase when they weren't maybe getting the most out of it and hadn't had all of the information that they need to make the most out of the Mercedes power unit. But look, lots of people are struggling with stars. Audis, they dropped like stones in this race today. Both Gabriel Bortoleto and Nico Hülkenberg, they admit that's a big problem for them. Actually, up until this race, the Red Bulls were struggling. They actually had all right starts today, Max said. So it's a number of teams that are struggling. I think it's just the functionality of it rather than maybe specifically the Kimi and George.
We've talked about the intra-team battle at Mercedes between Antonelli and Russell and how Antonelli stepped up. I'm interested by the gap between Piastri and Norris so far this year. It seems that Oscar's got the edge over Lando Norris at the minute. Would you agree?
I think Oscar's got the edge because, particularly here, Lando hasn't really had much lap time. So I think what we're really learning with these cars, and I'm sure Jack will be able to help here as well, is that if you don't get the mileage, the car can't learn what it needs to learn to deliver. And I think Lando had he running in FP1 when he was doing aero testing. He had the hydraulic issue in FP2. He had the ERS pack in FP3. He went into qualifying and still got a decent enough lap out of it. But, he's chasing it, whereas Oscar's had a super smooth weekend. But I do think that Oscar has done a really good job of putting last year behind him. And obviously the pain of that defeat. to the point where actually he started this season very, very strongly. And I think it's not a case of Lando started badly. I think it's just Oscar started very, very strongly.
And how important is a clean weekend, Jack?
Yeah, very important. I mean, you learn all these. There's so many different driving techniques you need now, and I can imagine that it can easily take a couple sessions to get used to these, at least a session. And I feel like it's so easy to get behind on the driving of these cars, even though I feel like there's not huge difference you can make. You can still make a difference on the energy management, and I feel like with driving style, even if you practice it on the sim, it's never going to be exactly the same, as of course it evolves by session. It can change by session, so it's super super tricky, I think, with the energy management if you're with a lack of track time.
What about the pecking order? I think Mercedes clearly still have the fastest car. Do you think McLaren, okay, Oscar finished ahead of Charles Leclerc, but do you think they had the second fastest car this weekend?
I honestly think there's not a lot in it, to the point where maybe, they did just edge Ferrari. I think Ferrari, they struggle at this circuit generally. This hasn't been a traditionally strong circuit for Ferrari anyway, so that might mask it slightly, but it did feel like on pure pace over the course of the weekend, the McLarens were just ahead. But looking at the race pace metrics through the weekend after Friday practice, into today, actually there was nothing in it really. And I think that's exciting, right? Because if both of them can find something over this next 5 weeks to take the fight to Mercedes, we could have a proper 3-team battle. But McLaren have done a really good job, haven't they? They didn't start the last race with either car, so they've only had one race bank of data, and they've managed to make this kind of step in the understanding of their car in race 3 already.
And Leclerc was impressive this weekend. Hamilton seems to have been a bit behind him all weekend. I thought Hamilton was less competitive relative to Leclerc than he has been at either of the 2 previous races this year. Is there an explanation from that from Ferrari?
Well, heading into this weekend, I had my first sit down with Lewis Hamilton in about 2 years, and he looked like he had his mojo back, basically. And I think that's on the basis of these cars are just his kind of cars. The Grand Effect era cars were not his kind of cars. And so he came into this weekend on quite a high, and then he's come to a circuit where they actually struggled really quite a lot last year. The car was sliding around, it wasn't really doing what they wanted, and it was exactly the same thing this weekend. The difference is I think Charles is just able to deal with that a little bit better than Lewis has, and that's what's created the gap. So I think it's too early to say whether or not Charles has now got the edge over Lewis, but I think this was a weekend where for the first time this year, I know it's a small sample, but Lewis was really struggling to get the most out of it, and he was chasing it again like he was for a lot of last year. So again, we're going to have to wait for another couple of races to understand if it's a fundamental thing. But I think Charles did a really good job this weekend. I think he was mostly frustrated yesterday because I think he felt like he could have got on the front row, and I think that shows how far he's come with this car. And he's also one of the drivers, personally, I think, who's just making the most out of the energy management. I think he's just a clever guy who's managing to make the most out of deploying in the right spots, recharging in the right spots.
Well, he had that amazing battle with George Russell at the end of the race, and that was because he was, dare I say, outwitting George. Although, did you get the radio comms over those last few laps? Because Charles said that his engineer was telling him what George was being told by his engineer, and George was doing the exact opposite of what Marcus Dudley had been telling him. And initially he said he was expecting George, because of the radio message, to attack in one place, and he was doing it complete. So he said, it took me a couple of laps to get my head around that they were misleading us intentionally. Are there a lot of games like that in motor racing? Just engineers saying one thing, but actually it's a code for doing the opposite?
It can be. I think, you don't want to complicate it for the drivers, of course, but I can imagine, if you're fighting for a world championship, I'd say you probably find it more later in the year. I think right now it's still probably too complicated for everyone, that they just need something simple and straightforward. But I wouldn't get surprised by the end of the year if he sees some of those. And
it was still another really strong start by Ferrari. Charles away from the line, jumped straight up into P2.
Yeah, I think that kind of benefit or that advantage that they've had since the start of the season, they're retaining that, aren't they? And I think that's why Fred Vasseur was so quite keen to allow them to retain that advantage, because they'd obviously created a smaller turbo for this year, which enables them to create these such lightning starts. And they're going to need that, I think, going forward, if they're going to take the fight to Mercedes, because at least it gives them the opportunity to haul themselves into the fight while they chase the aero performance and improve the power unit to, take the fight on those two levels.
It seems that the top 3 teams are together, and then there's a bit of a gap back to everybody else, and I include Red Bull in that. What areas of performance do you think each of those teams need to work on over this 5-week break that we've got ahead of us? Let's start with Mercedes.
I think the main thing that Mercedes need to get on top of is the series of niggles that they're encountering, and a lot of the time they're different niggles. The issues that George had yesterday was down to a very small tweak that they made between practice and quali that had quite a big impact that then led into the race. The starts are obviously a big issue, but they're not so much right now because they've got the performance advantage. But very quickly, we know that McLaren and Ferrari are going to catch them up, and then starts will become an issue because they won't be able to recover. So I think the starts is an area that they will want to get on top of. It's just unclear how quickly they're going to be able to do that.
McLaren?
I think McLaren have an underdeveloped chassis, so I think they realised very late on last year that maybe the methodologies that they were using weren't quite right, and that's kind of just meant that they've turned up with an ultra baseline car that they need to add performance to. So actually we just need to wait for the McLaren of old, which was bring big packages over the course of the year, 2 big packages, and they'll kind of make those steps going forward that they have done ever since they've turned it around to being a back running team to a front running team.
It's a mouth-watering prospect, isn't it? But Miami, I feel that it's almost, we're going to see every team, just because they've had time, bring big packages, aren't we?
It is going to be impossible for every single team to not bring the equivalent of a B spec, I think, to Miami. Probably these guys included. Maybe we can ask Jack about Aston Martin's plans, but I think every team are going to have to, because if you don't, you're going to be left so far behind, and actually that will probably set the tone for the rest of the season, because that package and that amount of money that you're spending on it, that's when we'll start to get a feeling of the true pecking order, I think.
We didn't mention Ferrari. Charles Leclerc will tell you that they need to work on their power unit, which they can't change. Chassis-wise?
But I think they can find a way to get them more out of the power unit, so utilise what they've got to make it better. And I think on the chassis side, they've got big plans. I think on the aero side, they've really bought some pretty cool things, like the flippy wing. We've seen that they've been really the ingenuity there has been incredible. So I'm fully expecting them to continue on that path. But you're right, they need performance, don't they? Chassis performance is what they need to catch Mercedes.
So guys, what about the midfield fight? Pierre Gasly, can we just have a Team Gasly moment? Pierre Gasly is driving out of his skin this year. He's clearly loving the cars. Alpine are getting better and better. P7 again today in the race. I mean, Jack, just your thoughts on the job he's doing this year, Alpine are doing, given that it's a new power unit that they've got to get their heads around as well.
Yeah, it's very impressive. He's the only one that's, really ahead of his teammate at the moment, and I feel like everyone else is pretty close between the teams, and he's the only one that's doing a much better job than his teammate, and it's he's doing a great job for them, constantly best of the rest of the top 3 teams now, better than the Red Bulls, so yeah, it's been pretty impressive.
Quiet satisfaction for him there, being better than the Red Bulls. Now, Jack, I know you've got to go and get an aeroplane. Lawrence and I will continue in a moment. Just before you go, can we touch on Aston Martin? First of all, those laps in FP1. For me, this is the greatest racetrack in the world. What was it like for you? Yeah,
it was incredible. It was my first time here at this track, and just learning everything was so cool. And learning the car, learning the track, it was just incredible experience, and just wish I had more laps, to be honest.
What was Sector 1 like, through the S's?
It was awesome, my first time going through there. Even though I was only on a hard set of tires, it was still, so much fun. I mean, turn 1 was so cool. You just go flat out through the first one, and just, soft on the brakes for the second one. It was such a cool experience.
Now look, no doubt it's been a difficult start for Aston this year. It's been well publicised, but small acorns. You've had your first finish here with Fernando Alonso. A lot has been learned in this Grand Prix, I imagine.
Yeah, it's been a pretty good weekend. Not many issues on the car. Had a small issue on my car in FP1, and of course with Lance in the race. But other than that, was a smooth weekend. We of course finished the race, so progress, which is good, and it means we're figuring out our reliability issues and all that. So yeah, positive.
And what does the break look like for Aston? I mean, in a funny kind of way, of all the teams here, I can imagine you could do with it the most, right? Just to work on updates and analyse the data.
Yeah, it's a good break for us. It's actually comes at a perfect timing because we really need to get on top of some of our issues, and I feel like now that we've finished the race, we have all this data to look at over the next month as well. So. Yeah, it's a great opportunity for us.
Papa Alonso was in good form?
Yeah, he seemed in good form. Yeah.
Look, great stuff. Thank you for your time. Safe trip back to Europe, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you very much.
All right. Imagine your first laps round Suzuka, Loz. It must be... I ran the track on Friday night, and that was good enough for me, so in a Formula 1 car...
I ran the track as well on Saturday night in the daylight for the first time. I've been coming here for 10 years, and it is a phenomenal venue. The undulation here is something I don't think you really appreciate on television. Yeah, of course you can see it's going up and down, but it's a stunning track. And yeah, to get your first opportunity around here in a 2026 car must have been incredible for Jack.
Yeah, now look, we were talking about the midfield fight. Jack was just giving us his thoughts on Gasly driving out of his skin.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, through testing, I thought Alpine were going to be best of the rest. I thought they had a car that was capable not only of just fronting the midfield, but chasing after, at the time, what we thought was a big four. Red Bull have dropped down into the midfield. And then they had a pretty awful first race, by their own metric, Australia. But I think the job that Pierre has done in kind of galvanising the team, kind of finding a good setup direction very early in the weekend, then building through practice and into qualifying and into the race and making no mistakes is exactly why Alpine spent so much money to keep him, at the team. This is his third contract I think he did with the team. The job that he's doing to take points at this point in the season, which will be crucial come the end of the year, Alpine made a big gamble when they decided to turn off resources on the 2025 car for this year, and they had to deliver really. It was super important, and Pierre getting 2 successive P7s is delivering on that. And I think actually they are the team for the first time in a long time that I see are in a really good position to start catching the front runners. And it's been a long time, Tom, hasn't it, since we've talked about, but they are doing such a good job. The Mercedes power unit seems to be working well for them at least, and the way that they are talking to each other, the chassis and the power unit. And I think the fact that Franco has stepped up this year and Pierre is still gapping him quite impressively is a stunning achievement. That car has been struggling with understeer in the high speed, and yet they managed to dial it out, and Pierre has found a way to take this car around this demanding circuit, and to add to all of that, he held off Max Verstappen towards the end, which is no mean feat, whether or not that Red Bull is a difficult car to drive. That is going to do wonders for his confidence, and I think it will do wonders for the team.
I was chatting to Steve Nielsen on Friday night, managing director there, and he was talking about the understeer you've just referred to and how it really kills you around this racetrack. So that race team, that engineering team is obviously doing a cracking job, because he said it's really hard to dial it out around here when you've got so much understeer, which they had. So that kind of will build confidence for every track, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think because that was the one weakness, I guess, of the car that they identified coming out of Bahrain testing. So if they have found something in the understanding of how to dial that out here, and here it will really hurt them, then yeah, I agree, Tom, that I think going forward it bodes really well, but it also bodes well for like the overall direction of the car and the development pathways, because they don't have to make any shock decisions or shock moves in a different direction. They've kind of already in race 3 dialed something out that was so significant that was holding them back, and we saw today it was evident that they've made that step forward, and now they are probably clearly the 4th best team in Formula 1, which is pretty impressive.
And they've got people joining them, so they're starting to sort of rebuild. It's gone from being a team that's had real problems, and now it's a desirable team. People want to join it, and you build momentum, don't you, as a racing team? Look, what about Max Verstappen? We touched on him there. Gasly comes home P7, Verstappen just behind him. It's been a pretty wild weekend for Max, hasn't it? Right from Thursday, which, you know, it was well publicised about him kicking a British journalist out of his press briefing for something that happened at the end of last season. He then gets out-qualified, you know, okay, on paper for the second time this year, but let's park Melbourne for a bit because, you know, Max crashed out with a problem. He was out-qualified on merit by Hadjar here.
I think he's thinking that he's in the worst spot that he's been in for quite some time, and what I mean by that is that it isn't like one thing. It isn't immediately clear where it is that it's lacking. It feels like everything they're trying is lacking. Red Bull tried this strategy last year. Laurent Mekies was really supportive of this, of when you're suffering a problem, just throw everything at lots of different directions and kind of see what sticks. And, you know, that had some negative impacts, but the majority of it was positive, and actually they found a way forward. They developed the car and obviously developed his way into a championship fight to the decider. This year, in the first 3 races, they've been trying everything. They are trying extreme setup choices. They are trying to understand why on earth this car is not dialing in the way that it should do with the changes that they're making, and nothing is working. And we got so used to Red Bull, you know, struggling on a Friday, Max Verstappen being quite critical on the team radio on a Friday, and then them curing it on Saturday and the car being fine, and that has not happened so far this year. And I think that is concerning for Max, because while, you know, the power unit is really strong and very reliable, they got 4 power units to the flag here this weekend, and they haven't really had any problems this weekend. That isn't good enough in the sense that the performance isn't there, and it feels like now it's maybe more on the chassis side of things that they are lacking, and Max will know that might take time to recover over the course of this year. And I think that the fact that Hadjar's been so close to him this weekend, he's been within 2/10 basically the whole weekend, obviously beat him, like you said, in quali, will be of concern to him. Not in his own ability, but it will outline how tough it is for him at the minute.
Do you think Red Bull are paying the price for developing so late into last season? You were just saying how Alpine turned the taps off last year's car very early on to focus on 26. We all know that Red Bull developed very late because they could sniff a chance at the World Championship. Do you think that is the root cause of where they are today?
It's a great point, Tom, I think. But I think when they made that decision, by the way, I think they accepted that this might happen, that they might struggle. But I think what they would have hoped to have done is have a better baseline car. So even if it was very underdeveloped like McLaren's, I think they would have hoped that they would have had this foundation, this very flat foundation, whereby it was very clear what they had to do and it would just take time to add performance. But at the moment, what they seem to have is a chassis where they don't quite know how to get the best out of it, and therefore it's not as simple as just having an underdeveloped chassis. It's an undeveloped chassis that they're not sure what to do with next, and we've talked about it already in the sense that this next update package that everyone will be bringing to Miami, you know, it's going to be significant for a lot of teams in terms of size, but obviously the impact on the rest of the season. If that package doesn't take a step forward, they might not have much budget left, to your point, to then develop and catch up for the rest of this season, and then they're going to have some big decisions to make, because it is impossible that they can't suffer from the development that they ploughed onto the car last year. Yes, okay, there were some learnings that they could make. I remember Laurent saying, if if you learn what is wrong with the car, that will help you in your learning for 26.
But will it? So who am I to question Laurent Mekies? Of course, I'm no one, except we get told by other engineers that not a single bolt has been carried over from last year's car. The philosophy of these cars is completely different because the ground effect is gone. I'd love to know what learnings you can carry over.
So I think we've seen it a little bit with McLaren, in that I think the methodologies that they used to get the very best out of that last generation of car worked, and so that's why they were able to relentlessly develop that car to the point where they became a world championship winning team. They tried to apply those same methodologies to the 2026 spec, and it didn't work in the way that they anticipated. They maybe went round the roundabout a couple of times to realise, we need to get off at this exit, and this is where we need to go. I think what Red Bull was doing, and I understand what Laurent was trying to do, is from an engineering perspective, I understand why we're struggling now, because we don't want to go down the same path with the 26 car if we're struggling. What's transpired is these regulations are very difficult, and it wasn't immediately clear to the reigning world champions how to tackle the car. So I think that actually, I don't think he was wrong in that sense. All that it's meant is that they've entered into this year on the back of having less money now to develop their way out of it because of the strategy they took last year, which on one side worked because it almost won Max Verstappen the World Championship, but on the other side has left them wanting from a performance searching perspective. But what has actually gone wrong for Red Bull, or it appears to be, is that they've just ended up with a car that isn't doing what I think they assumed it would do from the various data points that they got from the wind tunnel and the CFD. And I think that is hurting them. And I've talked to a couple of technical directors over the first couple of races, and I think what they've learned is they need on-track experience with these cars. They can't rely on simulation as much as maybe they could do with the last generation of cars. And I think that is why you're seeing teams like Red Bull and many others, Aston Martin, Williams, who are struggling a little bit because there is nothing that makes up for real world running of cars. And that is very different to the last regulation set, where I think they were in a world where CFD was enabling them to develop the cars. And I think that's why we've seen quite a difference in performance.
If we can grab a positive for Red Bull this weekend, Hadjar getting into Q3 and out qualifying Verstappen on merit, what will that do for Hadjar? And do you think it'll change somehow the intra-team dynamic within Red Bull? Just does it give, in his own mind, will it give Isaac a little bit of credibility maybe? That he and confidence?
Absolutely, it's going to give him credibility within the team. I think it will give him confidence, not that the guy needs it, because in a really positive way, he really believes in his own ability. But I think it will give him credibility within the team, that they will believe that if they make a setup change, or if they give Isaac some part to test, or they give him a program, what he delivers is going to be close to the limit that Max normally delivers. And I think that is what that team has been craving for a long time. So I think that is super encouraging. I think it will be a relief to the board, because they made the decision to promote him into that seat, and I struggle to see how that can be perceived to be a bad decision. I think on Max's side, I don't think it will affect him, because I think, Tom, you and I have interviewed him so many times over the years. He is bulletproof, I think, from a perspective of he's got this utter self-belief in himself. But I think he will be frustrated with the way that it is unfolding, because he's got used to a way where he can work with this team. He knows everyone there like family, and that they find solutions quickly, this team. And at the moment, that isn't there. So I think that will probably be of the greatest concern to Max, that the light at the end of the tunnel seems further away than it has been now for quite some time.
Elsewhere in the midfield, Lawrence, who stood out? I mean, just looking at the back end of the top 10, Liam Lawson coming home ninth, another great performance by him. Ocon back in the points in P10. Lawson just keeps quietly delivering. Is that a good summary of how it's gone so far for him?
Absolutely, and he made the point in the TV pen today that actually the car hasn't been that performant the last couple of races, and yet he's still in the points, and I think he's doing a really impressive job. Forgive me for the plug, but I wrote a feature heading into this weekend about what a difference a year makes for Liam Lawson. Obviously, this time last year in China, he'd just been let go from Red Bull. He's rebuilt his career at Racing Bulls to the point where they renewed him for this year. And he's come into this year, and I remember talking to Alan Permain about this, and he was like, there's so much potential in Liam, but no one's been able to get it out of him yet. And if I can just kind of narrow the pathway that he needs to go down, settle him down a bit, there's so much to come. And I think we've seen that in China, and we've seen that again today, that even if he hasn't got the best car, or he hasn't got ultimate pace in the car, he can find a way to grind out results. And I think that is one of the strings of the bows that he was missing, I think. And so Liam Lawson deserves props for the jobs that he's doing at Racing Bulls. And again, it's another example in the Red Bull family of he's rewarding the faith that they've shown in him.
And I think he's showing great mental resilience. It must have been a hard moment for Liam when the new guy, the young guy, comes in and has a stunning debut as Arvid did, to then bounce back in China with the points finish and do it again here will really bolster him, I think.
Yeah, and I think the jury was out, in all honesty, as to whether or not he would be able to rebuild his mental strength. But actually, he's levelled up in a really positive way. I think the way he reacted to Arvid coming in has been strong. But even throughout testing, I remember talking to him and everyone was going, how are you feeling about this new kid who's coming in? We know what Red Bull drivers do and that kind of thing. He'd never seemed perturbed by it, and that was the mental strength, or that fragility that he had shown in the past had disappeared a little bit. But he has done a good job, I think, of just pulling himself out of it. Like he wouldn't entertain it. If you try to get him to rile him up or to try and entertain the prospect of someone maybe threatening the seat, he doesn't entertain it anymore. And I think that is a real step forward that he's made. He's still got the belief in his ability, and he believes that he can do the job. But what he's been able to do is take a step back and not let himself get affected by things.
I'm just here to plug your work, Lawrence, because...
Thank you. I'll be here for that too, so let's continue.
Because I want to now talk about Audi. And I know you sat down with Mattia Binotto, the team principal and CEO, after Jonathan Wheatley departed sharply after the Chinese Grand Prix. Let's just talk about that situation before talking about performance on track. What did you learn from Mattia just about this, what looks like to be an evolving situation? Because Mattia confirmed, didn't he, that they are going to replace Jonathan?
I think the nature of how sudden it was became clear when in the press release they said, we're just going to figure it out. Mattia's going to take on the duties, to when I talked to him here in Japan, where they're like, I do need someone to come and take on the duties that Jonathan Wheatley was carrying out as team principal, which was essentially running the race team on a race weekend, while Mattia would focus on running the project, running the factories at Hinwil, in Neuburg, where the power unit is as well. And I think what's become clear to Mattia is he can't do it all himself. And I think the model that McLaren operate, which is Andrea Stella as the team principal, Zach Brown as the CEO, is evidence that you do need two strong personalities, experienced hands on the reins effectively. And so I think the fact that it's happened so suddenly shows that Mattia realises, look, I'll take over for now and I'll run the ship and steer the ship while I can, but we need to figure this out because we are Audi and we've made good progress in these early couple of rounds, but we need to make progress quickly, and I might not be able to do that if I don't have someone to help me at the race weekends.
Any ideas who it might be?
It's tricky. I think at the minute, I don't think they are sure who they want, whether they look to promote from within, and they've got a lot of talented people in that team. Alan McNish, for an example, who's running their junior driver program.
And has a great history in sports cars with Audi, actually, doesn't he?
Exactly. Yep. So it would make sense to bring him into the fold if they want to. Or did they find that actually the pilot with Jonathan Wheatley worked very successfully? He'd spent 20 years at Red Bull, that experience at a World Championship winning team. Do they need to go out and find that kind of experience? If they choose that solution, it's not a quick solution because they'll have to wait for gardening leave. If they promote from within, that's a much quicker solution.
And in terms of performance, I thought it looked pretty good actually earlier on in the weekend.
I thought Audi did a great job.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that actually they haven't been able to start two cars yet come into this weekend in Japan. So they were able to do that. I know the starts were not ideal. They lost several positions, both Gabriel Bortoleto and Nico Hülkenberg at the start, but they started and they got both cars to the finish. And yes, okay, they weren't able to score as they were able to do in the first race of the season, but I do think they are making progress. And I think in this new reg set, and then taking into account new manufacturers like Audi bringing power units, like Red Bull as well, we have to focus on these as being ginormous tasks that they have to deliver. So being able to get two cars to the finish is a significant milestone. And I think the job that Audi have done, particularly on the power unit side, is super encouraging, to the point where they are at the thick end of the midfield. So on their day, they are able to get into Q3. They are able to score points. And it's why Mattia is very keen for them not to lose that momentum.
And Hülkenberg just coming in, what is he, just behind Ocon in P11 with Bortoleto back in 13th. Painful one for Williams. Do you know what? This is a racetrack that really punishes weight, doesn't it, through all the quick corners, particularly in Sector 1, and there's no secret that the car is very overweight. So it was always going to be a difficult one for them, wasn't it?
Williams knew it was going to be painful coming here to Suzuka for the points you've just made, Tom, but also because they've got a car that is underdeveloped because they missed the Barcelona shakedown, so they are essentially lacking track running. But I think what Williams knew is that also they weren't going to bring any updates to any of these races while everyone else has, these first 3 races. So that was going to compound the problem. So that Carlos Sainz got into Q2 yesterday was a phenomenal job. But I think the fact that Alex Albon turned today into a test session, pit late on, the team admit that they were evaluating things for Miami, shows the position that this team is in. When you're turning a Grand Prix into a test session, you have got big things that you need to fix. Now look, fair play to Williams, they're getting the job done, they're working through the problems, they're being pragmatic about it, and they're using the running that they could get here in Japan to learn about Miami. But I think it does show how much of a hill that they've got to climb just to get back to the front of the midfield, when actually where they should have been was chasing the top teams. So a lot of work to do, and Carlos said something quite telling in the pen where he was like, if the update doesn't work and they don't make the kind of step forward that they hope to in Miami relative to the other teams, they're going to have to probably consider looking at next year, because it might be unrecoverable, this year. And that's a decision a lot of teams actually are going to have to make this year once these big updates come in Miami. So that weekend for not just Williams but a number of teams is going to be significant.
So Williams know what a mountain they have to climb, whereas let's just finally talk about a team that is not near the summit of what they're capable of, but they've had a cracking start to the year. Let's talk about Haas. Ocon in the points, a relief for him. I will say I was surprised by Ollie Behrman's struggles in qualifying, and then of course he had that horrendous accident in the race, 50G. Thank goodness he was able to walk away from that. But tell me about Haas. Give us your thoughts on their competitiveness this weekend.
I think Haas have been one of the most impressive overall packages this year, and what I mean by that is they seem to have a car where if they get everything right, they should be able to get at least one car into Q3. They should be able to score points on a Sunday, and actually, as Ollie Behrman has shown, be able to take the fight for actually some of the bigger points, in that kind of P5, P6 region. They weren't able to do that this weekend for a number of reasons, but actually what I think was encouraging was they're not panicking about that, where they might have done in previous years. Ollie, I think they're not entirely sure why they struggled so much in qualifying yesterday, so that's something that they need to go and work through. With Esteban, he managed to recover from missing out on Q3 to getting a point today, but wasn't able to hold on to some better points paying positions. But I think what that team have got at the minute, which I'm not sure Haas have had for maybe since 2018, is a car that on any given weekend, on any given track characteristics, can perform if they deliver. And I think Ollie's done that in the first couple of races. I think Esteban's done a good job to do that here. And to be fair, if they didn't have the problem in qualifying where they weren't quite sure what went wrong with Ollie, he would have almost certainly qualified inside Q3 or on the fringes off and challenged for points. I talked to him on the way to the grid this morning, and even though he was way out of position, he still fancied points. And that is telling, I think, of the position that he is in personally from a confidence level, but actually where that team is going forward.
And so do you think their P4 in the Constructors' Championship is an accurate reflection of their competitiveness?
Absolutely, I think so. While they might not have, say, the raw pace that Alpine delivered today, I think they have got that consistent pace, and crucially, they've got two drivers who are performing on a high level. So actually, they very much deserve that P4 in the Constructors' Championship. Let's not forget, they are beating Red Bull. They are beating Audi. They are beating an Alpine team that turned off development way earlier than they did. And I think we need to make sure that we remind people they are the smallest team on the grid with the smallest budget. And they do not have the capacity like others do to, when they have a problem, to fix it quickly. So I think they're doing a phenomenal job.
Well, long may it continue. And Lawrence, thank you very much. I love talking about Formula One with you. Look, before we go, driver of the day. Oscar Piastri got it on the telly. Who was your driver of the day?
This is tricky because I really did want to give it to Oscar, because I think the job that he did today, having not started a Grand Prix before coming to Japan, was phenomenal. And so I understand why the fans voted for him. But I think it is potentially this year's world champion, Kimi Antonelli, who's my driver of the day. I think dropping to P6 it could have unwound. It could have just gone completely wrong, and he didn't allow that to happen. And he fought back to find a way to win. And Tom, how many times have we said the great drivers find a way to win when they shouldn't do? And Kimi did that today. And the pace that he showed in those final few laps was phenomenal. And that was a signal, I think, to his teammate George Russell of the performance that he's got and what he can deliver. It was outstanding. What about you?
Yeah, well, hey, well said on that. I can only agree with you on him, and I think Oscar had a great race as well. So did Charles, but I'm actually going to give my driver of the day to Pierre Gasly. I love what he's doing. He's fearless. He's not succumbing to pressure. He had Max Verstappen breathing down his neck for most of the race. So a phenomenal race by him. Lawrence, thank you very much. Enjoy the break that's coming up.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. I always love these chats, and obviously what a great race to chat about.
And for more reaction and analysis from Japan, please go to f1.com, the official F1 app, and at F1 on social media. And don't forget to check out F1's other official podcasts. My guest on F1 Beyond the Grid this week is Red Bull team principal Laurent Mekies. That's out on Wednesday. You can also watch our chat on the F1 YouTube channel. And the latest episode of F1 Explains is all about the new tyres in this new era of Formula One with Pirelli's head of motorsport, Mario Isola. That's just below this episode on the F1 Nation feed. And with the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix not taking place in April, the next race isn't until Miami at the start of May. But don't worry, F1 Nation will be back next Monday, so I'll speak to you then. Thank you very much for listening. F1 Nation is produced by Formula One and Audio Boom Studios.